All right. Hello from the Authors Guild Foundation, and welcome to our discussion on handling your MFA student loans. This is part of our ongoing Money Matters series hosted by Erin Lowry, where we learn about personal finance for authors and freelancers. You can find more of these talks in the resources section of our website. We'd like to extend a special welcome to MFA grads and students joining us today. Please feel free to sign up for our newsletter to get industry news and announcements of our many free educational events. You can do that and learn more about the legal advice and other services we provide our members at authorsguild.org. Please use the Q&A box to submit questions during the talk, and our panel will answer everything they can. And now we'll turn things over to our moderator, Erin Lowry. Erin is the author of the 4-part Broke Millennial series, including one that released just last week, the Broke Millennial Workbook, Take Control and Get Your Financial Life Together. Erin's been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNBC, and The Rachel Ray Show. She's also a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion and publishes a Substack newsletter called Broke Millennial with Erin Lowry. Thanks so much to everyone for being here today. Erin, over to you.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Wonderful to have you here. So as we all know, there has just been so much news and controversy around student loans in the last couple of years, and it can feel really frustrating and frankly overwhelming to try to figure out a plan, especially for graduate school loans. Will student loans be getting canceled? Should you refinance? Does an income-driven repayment plan work and make sense for you? We'll be getting into all of that in today's discussion. Our panelists today are Betsy Mayotte, the founder and president of the Institute for Student Loan Advisors, and Cindy Zuniga-Sanchez, a money coach, speaker, and a fellow author. Betsy is the president and founder of TISLA, so it's the Institute of Student Loan Advisors. I know we're all going to want to look that up afterwards. She has been working in the student loan industry doing compliance and advocacy work for over 20 years. And has helped thousands of borrowers with their student loans. Betsy has served as a primary negotiator for several federal Title IX negotiated rulemaking sessions on topics such as the use of student loans at foreign schools, loan rehabilitation, and borrower defense to the refinancing or to repayment. In addition, Betsy frequently conducts regulatory trainings and higher education financing industry. She's regularly quoted in the media on student loan issues, including, so many, honestly, I can't even name them all right now because I just want to jump to the very exciting fact that she was featured in Money Magazine as one of the top 50 influential changemakers in America's finances. Cindy is a money coach, speaker, and the author of Overcoming Debt, Achieving Financial Freedom, 8 Pillars to Build Wealth. After graduating law school in 2015 with $215,000 of debt, Cindy documented her debt payoff journey on social media while sharing the personal finance knowledge she was learning in a simple and relatable way. Cindy has been featured on the Today Show, Good Morning America, The Rachel Ray Show, and Telemundo. She has partnered with the White House's National Economic Council to raise awareness on the American Rescue Plan and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Cindy practiced law as a commercial litigation attorney at an AM Law 100 firm before diving into full-time entrepreneurship. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm really excited for today's conversation. Just as a quick reminder to everyone tuning in live right now, do not hesitate to answer or submit additional questions into that Q&A box that you see down below. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And also, if we're answering something and you want a particular statement or answer, further elaborated on or clarified, please feel free. All right, with all of that being said, Betsy, I'm gonna kick this first one over to you. Is there a difference between forgiveness or repayment programs available for undergraduate student loans compared to grad school loans?
So, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I love talking about student loans, so I'm really, really excited about this next hour. So to answer your question, is there a difference with forgiveness and repayment options for undergraduate loans versus graduate loans? I'm going to assume we're talking just about federal student loans at this point. And for the most part, the answer is no. For the most part, the way the rules read today, with some exceptions, because let's just start this off right now. The way student loans work, most of my answers are going to be, have some exceptions to them. But for the most part, the rules are the same for both undergraduate and graduate loans when it comes to repayment and loan forgiveness. The one exception that comes to mind is one of the income-driven plans called Repay. That one has a longer period before you get forgiveness if you have graduate loans. If all you have is undergrad loans and you're on Repay and you don't pay off the balance within 20 years of being on that plan, then it's forgiven. But if you have graduate loans, that period moves up to 25. The other category of loans I want to throw in there, though, because there are more exceptions, are Parent Plus loans. Parent Plus loans, while they are, Parent Plus loans are eligible for public service loan forgiveness, they're eligible, sorta, with some extra hoops and secret handshakes and passwords for income-driven plan forgiveness as well. But again, there's more exceptions for those.
You know, you touched on something important there in the beginning of your answer, and that's differentiating between federal student loans and private student loans. So I am actually just going to have you elaborate a little bit on the fact that federal and private do not receive the same treatment.
No, they don't. And I want to further clarify, especially if you're I'm not going to say older borrower, I'm going to call you a seasoned borrower. But if you took loans out prior to 2010, you probably have what are called Federal Family Education Loan Program loans. And these days, a lot of people call those private loans. They are not. They are federal loans. Some of them are privately held. And that can make a difference for some federal program eligibility. But then you have true private loans, loans that the federal government have never tasted, smelled, or touched. So that we're looking at loans, say from Discover or Bank of America or Citizens Bank, although Citizens Bank at one point also participated in the federal loan program. State loans are often sort of categorized in the private loan sector. Private loans are not eligible for any of the things. Federal loans are eligible for almost all the things. And if you some people make the decision, usually due to interest rate or bad advice, of refinancing their federal loans into the private loan program. If you do that, there is no take backsies. And once you do that, even though at one point it was a fuzzy federal loan, it can never again, once you've made it a true private loan, it can never again be eligible for all the protections and relief programs that are unique to the federal student loan program.
Well, on that point, Cindy, I'm going to have you kind of come in and explain the difference between consolidating and refinancing, because I feel like we hear both of those terms a lot and it can get a little bit confusing. So what is consolidating and then what is refinancing?
Yeah, sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be here with you all today. So when we're talking about consolidating, we're typically referring to consolidation in the context of consolidating your federal student loans into a direct consolidation loan. So that's going to allow you to combine your federal student loans into a single loan that's going to give you one monthly payment, right? So I'm sure that if you log into your account right now at studentaid.gov, you're going to see that you have like 15 different loans, right? Like for me, when I graduated law school, I think I had over 15 student loans, right? And that process is going to help you consolidate, aka combine them into one single loan. That is actually going to be a requirement for certain student loan forgiveness programs, such as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, okay? But there are different things that you want to evaluate for whether consolidating your loans is going to be the right move for you. Studentaid.gov is hands down going to be your best resource for this. They even have articles about the different things to consider before consolidating your loans. And the reason why you also want to make sure you're paying extra attention to that is because, you know, once you consolidate your loans, you're not going to reverse that consolidation, right? You're combining all your student loans into this one direct consolidation loan through the federal government, right? But that is different from refinancing, okay? So Betsy already alluded to this, which is refinancing is when we're going to take our federal student loans and we are going to essentially take out a private loan to pay off our federal student loans. And now we have an agreement with this private lender. Okay, so Discover, or in my case, I refinanced my student loans. For me, it was SoFi, and the actual loan servicer was Mohila, which it can be a little confusing, right? Because now Mohila is a loan servicer for the public service loan forgiveness program. But back when I refinanced my student loans in 2017, Mohila was the loan servicer for my private student loan. So now the reason why I want to raise, kind of flags, caution here, right, is because Betsy already alluded to it. When you convert your federal student loans, not into a direct consolidation loan, because that still keeps their identity as a federal loan, but when you completely remove them out of that space and you convert them into a private loan by refinancing, that now means that any benefits that you would have had because of its status as a federal loan, like potentially loan forgiveness, potentially qualifying for different types of repayment programs, that goes away. Okay, your obligations are now to a private company. Okay, and you might be wondering, well, Cindy, why did you do that, right? Like, why would you refinance your student loans then if you're going to lose all those benefits? For me, it was worth it because I graduated law school with $200,000 of debt. I had multiple six-figure debt, and my interest rate on my student loans was about 8%. And so by refinancing, I was able to cut my interest rate by nearly half. Okay, so around 4%, which saved me not just time, but money also. It actually wound up saving me about $40,000. But this was the right move for me because I knew I wasn't going to qualify for any of these student loan forgiveness programs or anything like that. So yeah, it can get a little confusing, but it's very important to understand the very real ramifications that can come with refinancing your student loans, because there you're totally changing the status from it being a federal student loan to a private student loan.
Thank you, Cindy. And I just want to reiterate studentaid.gov being the resource that you recommended. I also co-sign on that being an excellent recommendation. Now, Betsy, Cindy just shared her reasoning for refinancing her student loans, but I'd love for you to elaborate on who else should consider refinancing student loans and who should maybe really consider not refinancing their student loans.
All right, well, I'm going to preface this by saying that I tend to be financially conservative. Part of it was the way I was raised, but also part of it is my experience working with student loan borrowers over the last 25 years. I can count on this hand and still have room the number of people where I said, yeah, it might be a good idea for you to refinance your federal loans into the private loan program, even with such a significant interest rate reduction that Cindy received. And the reason for that is because life can throw you curveballs. One of those big curveballs was the COVID pause for the last 3 years, where the vast majority of federal student loan borrowers not only haven't had to make payments, but they've enjoyed a 0% interest rate. And anybody that had refinanced their federal loans into the private loan program, they didn't get that and they couldn't get it. I've also seen all the terrible and horrible things that can happen to good people. So, even people that were financially secure and, PSLF or any of the loan forgiveness programs were probably not going to benefit them. And then only to find out there's illness or injury or they decide they want to be a stay-at-home parent, or they decide they want to change careers. And now all of a sudden, the fact that they have a lower interest rate is the least of their worries, because they would have appreciated having access to those federal options for relief and other benefits and safety nets. Now, with that said, I also work with private student loan borrowers. And there's quite a few of them where refinancing is a great idea, and they should probably do it more than once. And it's not just about the higher interest rate, although that's a key factor. But another thing that refinancing a private loan can do is alleviate your cosigner from the legal responsibility for the loan. And a lot of people and cosigners are really anxious to do that. Now, some private student loan products offer to drop the cosigner after X number of on-time consecutive payments, but they don't all offer that. Some of them make it a really difficult hurdle to meet. So again, refinancing can be a quicker way to alleviate your cosigner from the legal responsibility of the loan.
I also want to chime in with my unsolicited financial advice if you have a cosigner. And that is, if you have a cosigner on a private student loan, check your terms and conditions. If that debt is not discharged in the case of your death, you need a term life insurance policy to cover the amount of that loan, because heaven forbid something happened to you and they then are stuck with the burden of that debt and the grief of the loss of you. Most federal student loans, they are kind. In the case of your death, they're discharged. Not always true with private. So it's very important to check that. And I also want to say, for those of us who might have paid off a last student loan in December of 2019 after an aggressive debt payoff plan, it was also a bit of a, oh, maybe we didn't need to be so aggressive when we saw what was coming down the pike in 2020. But
Nobody
listen,
ever
hindsight.
could have predicted the last 3 years. Nobody.
Hindsight. And now, Cindy, just finalizing kind of on this consolidation conversation, can you consolidate undergrad loans with graduate loans? Like, does that make sense to do? And does that at all risk you being ineligible for any sort of forgiveness program or being on repayment plans?
Yeah, you can consolidate both your undergrad and graduate loans. That was actually an option available to me, right? So remember when I said that I had like the 16 student loans or whatever it may be, I could have had the option to consolidate my undergrad loans with my grad loans. But you do want to be careful with consolidating, and I'm sure Betsy can speak more to this specific point, which is losing credit potentially for payments that you've already made under certain programs, under certain repayment programs, if you are trying to seek income-driven or public service loan forgiveness, right? So those are two different forgiveness options available to you. And so you want to be careful, because in the past, you wouldn't get credit for those payments that you already made under those payment plans. And so consolidating risks losing that. But right now, currently, you can actually apply to consolidate, and you would get credit for those payments made through the end of 2023. So that's definitely something that you would want to go to studentaid.gov to not just understand the potential consequences of consolidating both your undergrad and grad loans, but also how it can potentially impact your eligibility for forgiveness for either, for example, income-driven or public service loan forgiveness. The studentaid.gov, and I know I'm going to keep on going back to them because they have such helpful articles and resources. They have what's called the loan simulator, and that's a really great tool that borrowers can use to determine if consolidation is right for you in the first place. So it's going to allow you to actually kind of take a look at your undergrad and your grad loans and understand, is this going to be the right move for me? But definitely some things that you want to make sure you understand before you actually go ahead and pull the trigger on consolidating your loans.
Yeah, I'd love to clarify on that, because things are a-changing. What Cindy's talking about is, since the dawn of time, when you consolidated, it would if you had been accruing payments towards a forgiveness program, either public service loan forgiveness or the income-driven plans, consolidation would reset your count to zero. So let's say you had 3 years under your belt already. If you decided you needed to consolidate for whatever reason, all of a sudden you'd be back to square one. Because of the various waivers that have occurred during the COVID period, that rule has sort of gone out the window. So as of right now, as long as Cindy pointed out correctly, if you consolidate by the end of the year, by the way, I'm a little squirrely about the fact that they didn't give an exact date, because that is very unlike the Department of Education. So I would not wait, to the last minute on that one, because they haven't given an exact date. But as long as you do it by the end of the year, they won't reset your count to zero. Well, let me be clear. They will. They 1,000% will reset your count to zero, but you'll get it back once they do this one-time income-driven plan adjustment, which hopefully we'll talk about later. Here's the other wild card. As of July 1st, we've got a bunch of new regulations that are coming into place. And one of those fun new regulations is that if you consolidate after July 1st, and I hypothetically after the end of this income-driven plan adjustment at the end of the year, it's not going to reset your count to zero, they'll do a weighted average of the counts you had on the underlying loans. So you still may end up losing out. So if you're someone that you feel like you are going to need to consolidate to take advantage of a benefit, and by the way, not everybody pursuing PSLF has to consolidate. In fact, these days, most people don't. But if you're someone that needs to consolidate to take advantage of a benefit, you want to do it early on. So after all these waivers and all that other nonsense is over, you're not losing out on counts. I'm really glad you brought that up, Cindy, because that's something that comes up a lot with borrowers.
Yeah, and it's been so layered lately, whereas before all these changes from the Biden administration, it was like, yeah, it was going to reset your clock. And I actually personally know people that they had already had qualified payments for these loan forgiveness programs, and they consolidated and it dropped their count to zero. So with the temporary waiver that occurred for specifically, I'm talking about PSLF in this one case, they were able to kind of get the credit back for those, which was wonderful, because it was really sort of a way of punishing borrowers. I thought it was very unfair that kind of like reset the payments and lose out on those credits. But yeah, I definitely think it's something that is so important to talk about, and as much as possible, hopefully see more improved changes being made for that.
Now, Betsy, we alluded a little bit previously to the freeze. We've talked about that a little bit. And I think for some folks, there's definitely some anxiety, even just coming out of the answers you were both just giving. We're like, well, they've kind of made it difficult before, and then they gave a waiver. It still could be kind of difficult. Like, I think the trust level is a little bit fractured with the consumer at this point. So the question being, how can I check that the months I didn't pay during the student loan freeze are still counted towards forgiveness at 20 years? So I'm going to assume this person is on an income-driven repayment plan.
You can't yet, but you'll be able to later. I mentioned this one-time IDR account adjustment. Basically what they're doing is they're going to go back to as far back as 1994, if you have loans that are that old, and give borrowers credit for any month they were in repayment towards IDR forgiveness, regardless of what payment plan they were on. In some cases, they're also going to give them credit for some deferments and forbearances, which historically don't count. Part of that project is going to create a place on studentaid.gov where you can see your IDR count. Some servicers have that IDR count already on their websites, but it's not going at this point. It is very unlikely that it's going to include the COVID months, because those aren't really considered, even though they've always counted towards the IDR forgiveness. That's just sort of not the way things are programmed. Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any servicer that shows those as a count right now, but trust, they will. Once this whole IDR adjustment project is completed, which isn't going to be, most of it's not going to happen until next year, then you'll be able to see your count not only on your servicer website, and it will include the COVID months. But the fact that the COVID months count for IDR forgiveness and PSLF is written in 7,005 different places. So it's about as good as it gets as far as being reassured that it will count towards your forgiveness count.
And a question just came in, will the 3 years during the pandemic count towards the 20 years? So we just want to clarify that is to what we're referring right now, was that freeze on your payments.
For most people. Because again, it wouldn't be student loans if we didn't have exceptions. If you were in school during any period during the COVID period, the months you were in an in-school status will not count. Same for if you were in a grace period during COVID, that supersedes the COVID pause. But if you were in, if it wasn't for COVID, you would have been in repayment, and you weren't in default, by the way. Default doesn't count either. Or bankruptcy. But if you normally would have been in repayment if it wasn't for COVID, then yes, those months will count towards IDR forgiveness.
There's always multiple exceptions to every rule. I think it's going to be a big takeaway from today as well. So Cindy, going over to you, we're going to get into a couple questions that are a bit more specific, but I also feel can apply to quite a few listeners. This first one, if you'll be earning a low six-figure salary in a year, are income-driven repayment plans still the way to go on a $30,000 grad loan?
Yeah, so I'm going to give the advice that I usually give to, my coaching students and whatnot, which is you definitely want to, first and foremost, back again, you want to use the loan simulator tool. And that the reason why it's because you're going to be able to understand what your student loan payments, what will they be? What are my repayment options? And the reason why I want to pause on the specifics for this scenario, right? Like a low six-figure salary, $30,000 grad loan, is that if, for example, your monthly payment, and this is all hypothetical, if, for example, your monthly payment on this income-driven plan, based on the fact that you make a low six-figure salary, let's just say as an example, the monthly payment is $300 a month. And the earliest that you would be able to qualify for forgiveness under, for example, the public service loan forgiveness program is 10 years, right? Because that's what PSLF requires. They require at least 10 years of repayment, including, like Betsy just mentioned, the COVID pause, which would be credited towards it. You will have wound up paying about like over $35,000 towards your student loans. And so the question comes down to math a lot of times, right? It comes down to running the numbers, understanding, are the payments that I'm going to be making towards my student loans, is forgiveness going to be worth it at the end of that tunnel? Now, if you have multiple six-figure student loans, like for example, I have friends that after we graduated from law school, they were going into the public sector, they were making, in like, let's say the low six figures, and they had multiple six-figure student loans. For them, I mean, I would say yes, right? Like pretty hands down, loan forgiveness is, and those being on those income-driven repayment plans, which are required for a program like PSLF, was very much worth it, because at the end of their monthly payments, let's say, for example, again, let's use the $300 number, as an example. At the end of that term, they would have paid, let's say, $36,000 towards their loans, but they still have, let's say, a $150,000 loan balance remaining that's going to get discharged. Yes, absolutely. In that case, it's totally worth it. But if you're in the kind of situation where you're like, wait, after using the loan simulator and running the numbers, I could probably even pay off the student loan before the 10 years or before the time of forgiveness, then it might be worth it just paying it off regularly and not waiting for that loan forgiveness. So I would say that definitely this is the kind of situation where we're going to need to do a little bit of math, right? And by math, I don't mean manually. Like there are so many free calculators, so many free tools that I encourage you to take advantage of. But definitely start with the loan simulator, because that's going to allow you to see what your student loan payments would be, what the various repayment options can look like, how much you would be paying towards your interest, right, versus your principal. That's all going to be really helpful, I think, in that scenario.
If I could just tag on to that, Cindy, I love everything you just said. I think we're going to be new BFFs. I hope you like gin as much as I do. But, what you were pointing out is what I say all the time, especially lately. I think people get so caught up in the word forgiveness, free stuff, that they miss the forest for the trees, right? Because the name of the game isn't forgiveness, is it? What you said so well, the name of the game is paying the least amount over time. And for some people, especially people whose debt is here compared to their income, paying the least amount over time means paying the loans off aggressively or even at the standard term versus a lower payment option. Because, the longer you take to pay the loans, the more you're going to pay in interest. So I love everything that you said there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Betsy, following up on one that's a little bit more specific, but again, can be applied more widely. This submitter, question asker, I just graduated with student loan debt. We don't have a number. Is there anything I can do to help with my student loan payments besides teaching in a tier 1 school for 5 years? So I do want to go ahead and clarify for other viewers, that's really in reference to the teacher loan forgiveness program. That's different from the public service loan forgiveness program. You might be able to use PSLF if you're a teacher. There's a lot of nuance that I'm going to let Betsy get into, but I just wanted to clarify for other viewers kind of what this is in reference.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is a great question to follow up on the one that Cindy just answered, because it's a great time to reiterate that the name of the game isn't forgiveness, right? The name of the game is paying the least amount over time. Now, this audience member, I believe you said they say they have fairly high student loan debt. They don't mention what their income is, but if it looks like this, where the income is here and the debt is here, then looking into the various forgiveness and lower payment options is probably a good idea. Now, the ones that people know about the most are teacher loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness, the income-driven plans. But there's actually over 100 different forgiveness programs. We have a database on our website, which is freestudentloanadvice.org, shameless plug, that contains all of the forgiveness programs that we're aware of. Most of them are state-based. Quite a few of them are profession-based, although there are a few oddballs out there. For example, the state of Kansas, at least last we checked, these programs change all the time, but last we checked, the state of Kansas was offering up to $7,000 in student loan forgiveness annually if you just moved to Kansas. They're like, please come here, we'll pay your student loans. But getting back to your user, he or she needs to take Cindy's advice and run the numbers through the loan simulator tool or the calculator on our website and see if PSLF might make more sense. Back of the napkin, if this, the most they can get forgiven under teacher loan forgiveness is $17,500. If they owe, say 30 grand south of that, chances are teacher loan forgiveness is probably the best bet for them. But if they owe a lot more than that, they probably want to hold off on the teacher loan forgiveness and pursue the public service loan forgiveness. But again, they're going to want to run their numbers through the calculators.
And we've had an ask for an additional shameless plug, please. Could you repeat the URL?
Sure. It's www. You can tell I'm a 90s baby that I still say that before the website. freestudentloanadvice.org.
Which is a great one. Now, I'm going to actually keep you on forgiveness for just a minute longer, because we were speaking prior to this starting, and I made a comment about public service loan forgiveness in 2017, and there being, what I have now learned is a lot of misinformation about people's, programs not being, or people not being able to have their loans forgiven and discharged. So again, I think that's a pervasive feeling and an anxiety that happens for a lot of people, is this idea that I'm going to get to the goal line and get rejected. And the question is, what are the best strategies to ensure that you are on track to receive forgiveness and won't be rejected?
To me or Cindy?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two things that you can do to make darn sure that you are not going to get rejected for public service loan forgiveness. The first one is read all the things. Public service loan forgiveness, although especially with the waiver, some people's like, oh my God, it's so complicated. But if you take a step back, it isn't. The key is you have to make 120 eligible payments on an eligible loan while working for an eligible employer. And all three of those things have to happen at exactly the same time. They don't have to happen consecutively. They don't have to, you don't have to work for the same employer the whole time. You don't have to be on the same repayment plan the whole time. As of July 1st, the payments don't even have to be on time anymore. So just, again, read all the things. Our website, I'd like to think it's comprehensive and in plain English. The Department of Ed's website, also comprehensive and in mostly plain English with a little reg speak thrown in there just for funsies. The other thing you can do to make sure you're on track is, although this isn't a requirement, submit your public service loan forgiveness certification on an annual basis. Get in the habit of doing that. That's the way you're going to know ahead of time. You'll get an early warning signal if something has gone awry, where you might not be meeting one of those 3 check boxes that I just alluded to a minute ago. Because every time you submit proof of eligible employment, they're going to send a letter back saying, here's what we counted and here's what we didn't and here's why we didn't. So again, those are the two things to make sure you're on track. Submit annually your proof of PSLF eligible employment and read all the things.
I think the other reason to submit annually is if you change jobs or your manager changes jobs or the person you need to get in contact with for something that happened 7 years ago is hard to get in contact with. Makes your life so much easier to just do it annually so you don't have to track people down at year 10 that related to year 2.
1,000%.
Yeah, and Erin, and one thing also, like, you know, so exactly what Betsy's saying, I think that it comes down to really keeping in mind that you need to have 2 accounts that you're regularly using. One is the studentaid.gov website, where it's going to help you access your PSLF help tool, and that's going to help you submit the form annually, which we want to do. We want to complete and certify our employment eligibility, you know, get our employer's signature on there. Recently they released allowance of having these signatures electronic, which is wonderful, because that was part of the reason why a lot of people were getting their forms rejected or the requests rejected, is because there was an issue with the signature. And so now the electronic signatures are really helping that. And so that's all good. But then the second account is your MOHELA account, right? Because when you sign into MOHELA, it's going to tell you, right? It's going to keep track of your progress and tell you, it's going to allow you to ensure that your payments are being counted. So, you know, I think that just ensuring that we're on top of these 2 accounts, studentaid.gov to use the PSLF help tool and MOHELA to keep track of our progress, is really going to help ensure that you are on track to receive forgiveness.
Well, you kind of just led us right into one of the other questions, Cindy, which I'm going to direct to you because you brought it up, but also we can punt it to Betsy if that makes more sense. Please explain how MOHELA determines the number of qualifying payments that have been made.
Yeah, so MOHELA is going to use the information that they get from your PSLF form that you are submitting. They're going to use that information to determine, okay, these are the qualified payments that have been made. And they're going to make that available through their online account. So my best friend is actually going through this process right now. And she even sent me screenshots of her MOHELA account because she had some questions. And it's really great because it shows in her case, actually, that she has, I think it's like 110 qualified payments, and then she has 20 pending payments. So it actually breaks it down in that way. And the pending ones is because they're waiting to, I mean, MOHELA is like really backed up right now, right? Because you can imagine all the changes and everything that's been happening. The fact that now they're the student loan servicer for PSLF. So, you know, they just basically need the time to process those 20 payments so that they can give her the credit. And then once they do, her loans are actually all going to be discharged, which is really awesome. So again, you know, that's why you want to, like Betsy mentioned, be really careful about submitting your form annually. Don't wait, you know, years down the road, and then you're going to have trouble tracking your employer or getting that signature or whatever it may be, because we know that those forms are basically going to look at, okay, for the past year, let's certify that this person was employed full-time at this qualified either nonprofit or government type of organization, and then we can communicate, and then MOHELA is going to say, check, this is, you know, you get credit for 20 payments, 30 payments, whatever it may be. But it is really important to do your part and ensure that you are keeping up to date with it.
Now, Betsy, a question came in, speaking of qualifying payments. The question asker said, will the years that I'm paying $0 because I have no income still count towards my 20 years?
For the income-driven plans, yes. If you are on, let's put the IDR one-time adjustment aside. Let's talk about traditional rules and the rules that will once again apply once the COVID pause is over and the IDR adjustment's been made. Assuming you're actually on an income-driven plan, $0 payments 1,000% count towards that forgiveness counter.
Well, and we've mentioned the IDR adjustment waiver a bit. Do you want to elaborate on it a little bit more, what you feel like people need to know or maybe often misunderstand?
Oh my God, I don't know if we have that kind of time. The Department of Ed finally put out a much awaited FAQ about the IDR adjustment on studentaid.gov. We also explain it on our website under the direct loan repayment option page, and we have an extensive FAQ document of our own. So I'm not punting this question when I say I suggest you go read all the things, because it is a little complicated. But here's a couple of the highlights, I guess. If you have federal direct loans, you don't need to do a darn thing. They are just gonna do it. Again, it might not happen for most people. It won't happen until 2024, but it will happen. There's no application for it. There's no income requirement. You don't have to already be on an income-driven plan for them to do this adjustment. As a reminder, what the adjustment's going to do is it's going to give you credit for every month that the loan's been in repayment or another eligible status, as far back as July of 1994, if your loans are that old, towards income-driven plan forgiveness, the 20 or 25 years that you need to get forgiveness. So for some people, even some people who've never been on an income-driven plan before, but they have older loans, this could result in immediate forgiveness, which is really exciting. There are some people that will need to consolidate before the end of the year to get access to it. And that's mainly people who have those old FFEL loans that we talked about earlier, or people that might have Perkins loans. But if you already have all direct loans that have all been in repayment for around the same amount of time, you don't need to consolidate. What else do we want to mention about the IDR adjustment? Payments that count towards an income-driven plan also potentially count for public service loan forgiveness, assuming you were working full-time for a PSLF eligible employer at the time. This is really going to benefit Parent Plus borrowers who were eliminated for no good reason, and I'm still salty about it, from the PSLF waiver, but maybe they weren't on an income-driven plan, but were working for a PSLF eligible employer in the past. So this will really help them. The last thing I want to mention, again, in the interest of time, is if the adjustment isn't in and of itself going to bring you to the moment of forgiveness, bring you to the 240 or 300 payments you need for forgiveness, you 1,000% will need to be on an IDR plan once the COVID pause is over to continue to accrue the payments that you need to get forgiveness under the income-driven plans or PSLF for that matter. Now, I hear from a lot of borrowers when I tell them that, saying, well, wait a minute, I use the fun little simulator tool, and based on my income and my balance, my payment's going to go up, 8 times, and I'm going to end up paying the loan off before hitting the 240 or the 300. And my answer is, yep. The vast majority of people are going to pay their loans off in full themselves. So, the idea behind the IDR adjustment isn't to forgive everybody's loans, but it's to take into account the fact that maybe they weren't counseled as robustly as they should have been in the past.
Well, also speaking to just the general cost of everything, including inflation and having to carry student loans, a lot of people, particularly in grad school, end up with maybe a little bit of credit card debt. And so, Cindy, I'm going to ask this one to you. If somebody has credit card debt in addition to their student loan debt, what are some of the best practices or ways to tackle the debts, including what order should you be prioritizing things?
Yeah, so as someone that graduated with, like I said, $200,000 of student loans and about $13,000 in credit card debt, definitely, tackling, generally speaking, your credit cards are going to have the higher interest rate, right? Right now, credit card debt and credit card interest rates are at record highs, and where we're seeing the average interest rate on credit cards at about 22%, which is about 4 points higher than it was just 2 years ago. We want to tackle that debt first because it is costing us the most money. All right. And so I think that when you go ahead and create a debt repayment plan, okay, you want to include in your debt overview, in your plan, different pieces of information. For example, the kind of debt that you're tackling. So for example, your Bank of America credit card and your federal student loan. And you want to include the amount, your balance, your interest rate, okay, and your minimum payment in your debt overview. These are 4 pieces of information that you should know for all of your debts, okay? Whether you just have credit cards and student loans, or if you have other types of debt too, a car note, medical bills, etc. And then from there, you can determine the order especially when it comes to credit cards versus student loans. I would go in the order of the highest interest rate to the lowest interest rate. So we are tackling our student loans in order from the debt that is, I'm sorry, our debt, we're tackling it in order from the one that is costing us the most to the one that is technically, when you look at the interest rates and et cetera, is costing us the least. And so if you have multiple credit cards, let's say you have one at 27%, 25%, 20%, that would be the order that you're tackling it. Take it one at a time. Of course, you're going to make your minimum payments on all of your debts, but you're going to aggressively tackle. And by aggressively tackle, I mean making the minimum plus any additional payment that you can make. You want to do that one by one. You want to have some type of debt repayment strategy. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say credit cards are the first that need to get paid off because it is costing us so much. And that's what I did personally. I really focused aggressively first on my credit card debt. I had a credit card that had actually 29% APR, which was awful. And that is the reason why I was super, super adamant about getting rid of that credit card debt first. And then I was able to, once I freed myself from the credit card debt, really turn my attention more into aggressively paying off my student loans, which is basically what I do.
We always like to add a little disclaimer, please pay the minimums across all your debts while aggressively paying down anything. We don't want to be missing payments. Just want to make sure.
No, we always want to pay the minimum on all of our debts. We want to make sure that we're doing that also, not just because, well, otherwise you would be marked as delinquent and there's potential legal ramifications, right? Like we want to be very careful, not going into collections on all of that, but also making sure that our credit isn't injured as well by missing payments or, you know, whatever it may be. One more thing I want to plug in is use a debt repayment calculator, especially when we're talking about credit cards. I really love the one from Credit Karma. It's super self-explanatory. So if you just search Credit Karma debt repayment calculator, it'll come up and it helps you see, well, what if I wanted to make an additional $50 monthly payment? Or what if I wanted to pay off my credit card in 2 years? What's the payment I would need to make? And it's going to do all the math for you, you know, so it's a free tool. I highly recommend it.
Thanks, Cindy. So Betsy, for authors who are listening to this and maybe are currently in an MFA program or thinking about going into an MFA program, do you have any thoughts about the best way to minimize student loans for grad school? Because it does seem to feel like so many of the scholarships are focused on undergrad.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is don't borrow assuming forgiveness. While I don't think that the public service loan forgiveness or these IDR forgiveness plans are going anywhere in the near future, again, you don't know what type of curveball life's going to throw you. So again, never borrow assuming forgiveness. The second tip I want to give you is when you're looking at your first year of grad school or looking at around the total you think you might have to borrow, stop looking at the number you're going to owe. I'm going to owe $100,000. Look and translate that into a monthly payment amount and sort of work that into an estimated budget. In my experience, that's a lot more meaningful when you're understanding the impact of debt than just looking at $100,000 versus $1,200 a month every month for 10 years. Now, getting to your actual question, I didn't forget it, which is how to reduce debt. Ideally, you're going to find a job at an organization that has a tuition benefit. That can help you reduce. On a related note, I know it might not seem ideal. Don't go full-time, go part-time, and work full-time and pay as much of that out of that tuition out of pocket and reduce the need for loans as possible. In the grand scheme of things, especially when you get to be as old as I am, you realize, 4 years rather than 2 years is really not a big deal usually in the grand scheme of things, especially if it's going to save you 5 or even 6 figures in student loan debt. The next piece of advice is you don't have to wait till you're out of school to start paying it. In fact, especially if you have subsidized federal loans, you might even be able to pay some of that off interest free. There's never a prepayment penalty on student loans. So get in a habit of at least paying the interest that's accruing on your loans while you're in school. And again, as you pointed out, there's not as many scholarships, but there are some out there and there's some grant programs out there. So, hopefully your Google foo is strong and you can seek out some of those opportunities.
I just want to remind those of you who are tuning in live right now, this is last final minutes to submit any other questions you might have. Now, one that did come in was, if I recently became eligible to receive disability benefits, will my loans be forgiven? Betsy, I'm going to give that to you.
Maybe. So if you've been granted Social Security disability benefits at the status where you are only reviewed every 5 to 7 years rather than more frequently, that would qualify you for federal student loans, that is, for total and permanent disability discharge. Now, if you weren't granted that level of disability under Social Security, there's other ways. If you have a physician that certifies that you are unable to work due to disability or due to illness or injury, and that's likely to continue for at least 5 consecutive years, that's another way to be eligible to get your loans discharged under that particular provision. The government website for TPD discharge is disabilitydischarge.com. I know that seems weird, but apparently there was a squatter on the .gov website. So that is legit Department of Ed's disability discharge website.
Thank you so much. Now, in these last minutes together, one of the questions that came in that I really find interesting, but might be a bit heavy above just a general student loan conversation, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, is what can be done about MFA programs and college programs at large to improve their students' success outcomes? Now, I'm going to tee up one thing for you a little bit, Betsy, because you had referenced just the cost of education prior. So I would love for you to touch on that. And then Cindy, follow up with any of your thoughts as well, especially with your own experiences coming out of law school.
I'm going to, your question's sort of a 5,000 foot level question. I'm going to take it up to 10,000 feet. So, all the programs and the waivers and the relief that the current administration has done, a lot of them you may not have even heard of over the last 3 years have been amazing. The Biden-Harris debt relief, if it should squeak by the Supreme Court, would be amazing. None of it addresses the actual problem. Student loans are not the problem. Student loans are the symptom of the problem. The problem is the cost of education, the cost of higher education. And the fact of the matter is that, one of the reasons that the cost of higher education has gone up so significantly over the past decades is, for one, the states have de-invested in higher ed. I think we were on track to get the states to start reinvesting in higher ed, which would arguably lower the price of what I call the anchor price schools, which are the state schools. And then from a competitive standpoint, the other schools would follow. Unfortunately, COVID sort of derailed that. But the other issue, and this is not going to get me added to a lot of Christmas card lists, I get it, is schools don't have any skin in the game to speak of. And I hate to say it, but I think it's time, in a thoughtful and mindful way, for schools to have some skin in the ROI issue that higher education has become. Now, I know I'm speaking beyond MFA programs, but the issue applies across the board. So I think those comments apply to MFA as well as everything else. So, Cindy, what do you think?
I completely agree with you. I mean, I was mentioning earlier that to you both that my law school tuition when I was a student was $50,000 a year. And right now I just checked and now it's $70,000. Mind you, I graduated law school in 2015. Right. And it's like, it's absolutely absurd to think about how the rapid increase in student loans in school tuition is far outpacing the rate of wages increasing. And that is causing a problem, because if wages aren't catching up to what it costs to go to school, then how are you going to repay said school? Right. And so I think that a lot of it, and exactly what you said, that I don't believe a lot of schools really have a skin in the game, right? Because if people are paying, if people are still attending then it's kind of like, well, why not? And I think something else that we saw during the pandemic, where schools went remote and they were still seeing those numbers of admission applications coming in, it's kind of like, well, we're going to continue charging what we charge, even if we're not offering what we normally would have offered the student body. And I actually think that was, to me personally, really alarming to see that a lot of schools were just operating as normal business, and so I think it's really important, as either a future student or a current student, to really understand also your options and run the numbers on the ROI for what your program specifically costs and the types of jobs that you can also get. And I know it's very uncomfortable to bring up this, right? In conversation, because people automatically assume that, certain degrees are just, they're shiny and that's going to be what's impressive. But you also need to make sure you're doing your research on the types of jobs, the types of salaries. Talk to alumni from your school, right? Have those conversations. I think it is really important because the fact that wages aren't they're not at all comparable to what it costs to go to school. It's heavy, and it's an issue that I don't think gets talked about enough.
I agree. And just, I guess the last thing I want to say, what I find incredibly sad about this entire conversation is that the fact of the matter is education, the days of education for education's sake are gone. The college decision and the degree decision, for the most part, have become and had to have become a decision that's based on return on investment. So especially when you're talking about the arts, I want to go get a degree in philosophy, or I want to go get a degree in writing. People, question that now, because are you going to have to take on student debt to do it? And are you going to be able to make the money to repay that debt? And I find that incredibly sad that, again, the days of education for education's sake are gone.
I agree.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for being here. This was incredibly insightful and illuminating. I know I learned a lot through. I'm sure all of the viewers did as well. And Rich, if you have anything else that you need to add here at the end, please hop on. But we appreciate you both so much. And everyone who tuned in live, make sure to check your email inboxes. We'll be sending follow-up emails with both Betsy and Cindy's information and the resources that have been suggested throughout this webinar.
Thanks for having me. I had fun.
Same. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I just want to say again that you can find the rest of the Money Matters series with Erin Lowry at authorsguild.org, and we also have a playlist on our YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with Erin for a talk on building your own benefits as a self-employed person, where we'll discuss how to handle stuff like retirement savings and other financial planning for authors. So we look forward to seeing many of you there. Thanks again, and have a great day. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.